Hello, and welcome to Legislative Access. The purpose for our show today is to get to know our elected officials better. So some of the things we'd like to share is, what are your hobbies, your interests, what do you do in your free time?
Well, very good. Like most of us, free time is probably a little thin, but farming, of course, takes up most of it outside of the legislature, and there are a lot of meetings that we go to. The great thing is we have a lot of involved community folks, groups, who do want to be involved and share their vision, so that's a big plus. When I can get away, I love to do anything on the water. So if I can jump on the boat and ski, that's a great day. I used to enjoy biking. I haven't gotten back to that as I've moved back from the financial services world in 2008. I haven't been able to keep up with that quite as much, but still have the chance to play around with water, both with working with it on the farm as well as any time I can get on the boat, which has been 3 times, 5 times last summer. That was pretty good.
Yes, we enjoy Milford Lake. You have a favorite lake?
No, I like any of them I can get to. I usually go to Canopolis just for proximity and rushing out. It's always painful to have to rush to have fun.
Yeah. Now, geographically, where is your farm located? We're in Salina, Kansas, doing our taping here at Access TV. Where are you from Salina?
So I am just south, and specifically the place is just outside of Assaria, and I would farm from just south of Metter to just north of Lindsborg.
Very good. Now, you said I and we. Some family involved, or siblings, or children?
Where I grew up, my brother also farms there. He runs the livestock operation, and I just have diversified crops.
Oh, very good. Well, you mentioned something about financial services. You're also doing that, or you used to do that as your occupation?
More used to. I am still licensed and do just a few things to stay active in the industry, but when I graduated from K-State, I went to work in financial services and continued in that through 2013. And there I worked with what's now Ameriprise Financial, and worked in the field and in the home office, and my role for most of the years had something to do with investment advice and products.
Sounds like some good experience that way. And how about any kids back on the farm, or kids at college?
No, so it is just me there. So I'm single. I did enjoy my time with Ameriprise. I did work in most of the states and traveled a lot and wound up moving a lot. So one of the goals was to come back and be somewhere.
Yes, yeah. I can appreciate that. Osborne County is my home county, and we're 3rd-generation farmers there. So I'm a little envious. We were visiting early a 5th-generation farmer. I'm a little envious of that. Now, moving ahead a little bit to politics, what was it? Was it the financial side, or what got you interested in politics?
Well, it'd be both. If we go all the way back to growing up here at Assaria, different groups, 4-H and the Rural Electric Cooperatives, had legislative events, and working with that is probably where I became interested in it. And I did stay involved with student politics through Kansas State and even at the University of Chicago, where I went to graduate school. From there, I did focus on the career. In 2008-9, there was the big downturn, which made, in the markets, which made our pension liability very noticeable. And that was a large concern. And that was then the collision for me between the professional interest that I had and the service interest that I had been latent at that point to consider running for office.
So so it pushed you into, like, this is what I'm going to do.
Right. That, and a few folks happened to talk to me at that time, and so.
Yeah. So at that time, when you started out, what were some of the causes that you championed?
Well, mostly the pension is what I got deeply involved in. And I don't necessarily know that it was a cause. And the great thing about that is I think everyone had the shared desire of just a stable foundation financially for that particular one. And so I went particularly deep on that. Then anything that related to the ag world was certainly one that's important to the 108th district where I am, which is a small part of Salina. I do have 3 precincts, which is the largest population in the district, but then some areas of rural southern Saline County, northern Rice County, all of Ellsworth County, and then the township and city of Lindsborg in McPherson County. But nonetheless, rural issues were important to really all of the district as we looked at that. So inside of that, aside from what things there were with agriculture, water is one of the main things we've been talking about at the state level.
Yeah, very good. Well, that gives us some background on what got you interested and what you championed. Now for some more specific questions. Talking a little bit about tax and the budget, I have 3 specific questions for you, and I can say all 3, and then you can have me repeat if you need to. Number 1, increasing state revenues. Number 2, decreasing state expenses. And number 3, balancing the state's budget in the coming session. So if you could speak to these, increasing the state revenues first.
Very good. Well, and all 3 are related. But increasing the state revenues, we have to look at what we want to do. So it's going to be tied to certainly the expense question. I do now serve on the tax committee. That was new to me last year. I had served on the ag committee during that time slot from when I had entered. But I moved to tax last January. So I will be looking at the revenue side of the equation. And I think it's important to have a plan to meet whatever shortfall is there. For me, in increasing revenues, it starts with the income tax on businesses. While I will absolutely agree that reducing taxes wherever we choose to reduce them would be stimulative, anywhere that I am able to put money, if we could walk down Santa Fe and hand people money, I think that would be stimulative. I think people would spend that and use that in ways that are good. However, each time we change the tax law, we create other challenges. So I'd like to get one that we can kind of stick with, but as we saw in the change in business tax, we had, 150, maybe 180,000 LLCs and small business entities. Now we have 330. While I do believe we got some new businesses and maybe helped people create new business in some small part due to that, I think a lot of people did what was in their best interest and changed that form of income to one that would be the most advantageous. I think those and other things were not accounted for in the assumptions and the projections.
Yeah, it makes me think long-term, medium, short, some of those really short-term. If we doubled the LLCs in that response, then how is that going to help us in the long term? Yes.
Well, if they were all new businesses, we should be seeing the growth in the numbers, and I would submit that we're not seeing that type of growth. So I think we saw a recharacterization more than we saw an increase. As you try and deal with that and say, okay, well, who really did we intend to stimulate, to help, et cetera? What is the degree of that stimulus, and what can we realistically expect? If I am paying a 5% rate on $100,000 in income, can I hire someone for that $5,000? I can't really create a job. And so many of our small businesses are absolutely able to do other things that are useful, and I would like for them to do that, but I'm not sure that I can drive the employment and the major investment that's there. Certainly on the federal level, that is a much bigger decision than it would be at perhaps the state level. I think that directionally, I think reducing our income tax was a good step. I think it was useful to be competitive in that. I think it's even great to be able to be the lowest of our income tax neighbors. I don't necessarily know that that's entirely possible in terms of the mix that I would choose to have in taxes, but I think competitive is very important. And that's somewhere between 0 and Colorado is our lowest income tax neighbor at, I think, 4.63%. So
You said was. Was. What does that mean when you use the word was?
I'm not sure I remember where I used it.
Okay. Well, it was a good idea. It was a good measure, a good step. Maybe what's next then?
Right. So I would say it was a good idea to lower. I would say that I don't go all the way to say going to 0 was the good idea.
Okay.
So,
not too much, not
Right.
too far. Okay.
Right.
Thank you for helping with that. How about when you think about balancing the state's budget? Where are we with that? Thoughts on that, short and long term, on balancing the state budget this next session?
Really important. As we look short term, we're still not there. We are right at a 0 ending balance, and Director Sullivan, the governor's budget director, has a very difficult job. How do you make this equation, which must balance balance in light of the shortcomings of the assumptions that we have given them. We're at a zero ending balance. Perhaps with the revisions, we will meet revenue estimations going forward. I fear we will not. In that, we had two pieces which amount to about $60 million, guaranteed payments and the tax amnesty program. I don't need to bore people with what those are, but as nearly as I can tell, those are just being counted in the income tax figures that are coming in. There's nothing additional being attributed just to those. So I'm wondering where that $60 million hole will be filled. And perhaps it will be, but I wonder. And I wonder, even as we continue to look at that, while the estimates have now been revised to levels that I think are reasonable, I think it's very possible that we have a few misses between now and June. So I would want to plan in the tax committee for a minimum of how do I come up with $80 million this year. And that either has to come from tax or spending. Realistically, this year, it's spending. It is hard to come up with taxes overnight.
Yes, $80 million overnight?
You can't change that policy. I can change the income tax policy, but it's not coming in until next year. So that doesn't help me. So getting through that short term will probably consist of looking at how do we move monies between various silos.
That sounds like
to
an
get
ouch for
through
the
July.
people that it gets taken away from.
It would
If you take
be.
it from here, you put it to there.
It would be.
The ouch of the people it gets taken away from.
There are.
You're acknowledging that,
There are
yes.
many, absolutely. And it is not a painless thing. Longer term, we can make decisions about what we don't do. We can say, well, we're not going to be able to do this. And if collectively we agree that we are not able to provide a particular service, longer term, I think you can work through that. Short term, it becomes very difficult. So as we look to the next year then, that's where I think our tax policy has to be met so that the 2017 fiscal year actually meets those expectations of whatever they are and actually has an ending balance. If you're running a $6+ billion general fund, a $13+ billion total state fund budget, a zero ending balance. I don't know any businesses that dare to run with no margin. Necessarily, there has to be something that you can pay those bills, that you can pay the employees, that the necessary details are met. Statutory, do we have to be all the way at that 7.5% amount, which I believe it is? Maybe not. But to be less than $100 million in an ending balance, I think is not being financially responsible to meet our obligations. Therefore, the tax piece, I think, has to be looked at again. Unfortunately, in a manner not entirely different from what held us up forever in June to try and come up with a solution to make sure that whatever that budget is will get us there.
Yeah. Sometimes it seems like, why did you wait so long to do whatever it was to make that decision in the end? Why not working on that? Are you really working on that and all of the other committees are working on that earlier? Could you help us understand why it feels like from the outside that it waited to the last minute?
Not completely, because it did feel that way. So I'll walk through my role, others' roles that are there. In the pension committee that I set the agenda for, I have a plan for what I want to do. I welcome other people's ideas, but I know what we have to do to meet whatever those issues are, and we're going to figure out how we work through them before the deadline hits. So I would push leadership to say, what is a plan to work through that? The governor did offer a plan around April. Nobody liked it, so a lot of folks chose to ignore it. And when we got back in May, it was evident that there wasn't a plan. And so several people, the group that I worked with was myself and Mark Hutton and a number of other people. Representative Hutton happens to be from Wichita, and we just started putting numbers together and coming up with plans that would balance. And literally talking, not around the clock, but from early morning until 10+ at night at the Capitol with whatever groups we could assemble, which then went from May through when we finally got out of there in June. So to that, I'm sure there are other groups, but Mark and I, another representative, another senator, have been meeting to have our plan to say, what would we do if we needed $100 million? What would we do if we need $150 million? What would our plan be to at least offer and to start those discussions. While we can't necessarily bring that on the floor or push it through the committee, we would have some concepts ready to bring either in an amendment form or something to have a discussion that could start and at least have something drafted before the session starts in January.
Yeah, that's good to know, to hear some of that, what leads up, this leads to this, which leads to that.
Right.
Very good.
And Mark and I had not done that. We were both new to that committee, and we spent most of January and February last year in the tax committee with very useful hearings about different tax policies and impacts, but nothing with moving to a specific solution. To that end, there was a expectation that through the April consensus revenue estimating numbers, that something might work out and taxes would not have to be materially changed. By April, then it was clear the budget was pretty well set. The numbers came in worse yet again, and the scramble started from that point.
Very good.
So anyway, but the reality is there could be a scramble.
Yes.
So what do you do if there's
What
a
if?
scramble?
Yeah.
Exactly. And it is possible to have plans to move through with that.
Well, in case you just joined us, we are here with Legislative Access TV, and I'm Brenda Gutierrez, and this is Representative Stephen Johnson, hearing a little bit about budgets and taxes. Next, let's talk a little bit more about the pension and the benefits committee that you're on. Thinking about the number of vacancies there are, how would you speak to vacancies and that feeling of security of any of the state or educated, anybody in those kind of positions out there?
Well, in terms of the pension piece specifically?
Yes.
Yeah.
If I have a job and I'm concerned, or my spouse or my friend or family, we're concerned about there's vacancies, will I have a pension, will these positions be filled, how will I receive services, looking at it from the other side, kind of the consumer side of how will I receive services from these state-type employees?
So receiving services may be a little broader, but I'll start with the pension piece and can I be secure in that? And the good news is our state employees can be secure in their pension and in the fact that there are dollars there that will meet that. And understandably, there's a concern of where in the world we are. We started the process, well, it has actually started long before me, when the pension was set up in the 60s. The people who did it right. They set it up funding more than what the benefit would require. Over time, we appropriately increased the benefit, and I would say appropriately, to what the funding met, until 1993, when we made some changes where the funding did not go up, but the benefits continued to go up. And that began building our liability in earnest, and the market performance really uncovered that when the 90s quit and the great performance that was there. And even before that, there were other issues, so I don't mean to minimize them prior to that time, but it does create questions of what's there and will it work. We were at moments only about 50% funded on the market liability.
Things like that make people nervous.
Very and should. We are now 67% funded on the liability, and that's on the actuarial liability. So there's actually some market gains built in from previous years that make it slightly higher, but 67 should be consistent with the numbers that people are hearing right now. That's still not good. I would say, sadly, in the pension world, people are comfortable at 80% funded. And the reality is, if you are taking risk, your goal needs to be 100% funded. And you should have market performance that pushes you past that, and market performance that pulls you below that, obviously. But we have a plan that will get there. So can I be secure? There is now $17.5 billion in assets available to pay those benefits now and ever forward. And there's a liability that's bigger than that. But that $17 billion, we're getting about $1.1 billion in contributions every year from the state and employees. We pay out about $1.4 billion in benefits total. So that's a difference of about $300 million that has to be generated from that $17 billion. Well, that's actually pretty easy. If you run the math on that, that is very sustainable. The challenge is that schedule of benefits is set to grow, and we need to anticipate that and not follow it. And that's why there is that liability. Nonetheless, if you ran those numbers, and we continued to sit on our thumbs and not address the problem, it would take about 30 years to run into the ground. But then what do you do? That is something we can't hand off to the next generation.
Like, do I want to take
Right.
a job as a state employee? Do I not?
Decent point. Right.
When you're looking at your future,
Right.
30 years.
Very definitely. So now that security, I would say, is there. The funding is set. The benefits have been set. For new employees, it is a different benefit, and it is based on a cash balance plan. And that cash balance plan does not have, it has a few more specifics as you watch it all the way through, where you're seeing your account value and what that is worth, and those dollars will be, I think, easier for folks to track. It is not as good a benefit.
Yeah, because if I'm a young person coming out of college, out of high school, how competitive are those going to be?
The benefit that we have, I'd say, would be competitive with industry, and it is competitive with some other states. The other states that still have a full defined benefit program, that would be a more attractive retirement benefit than what our cash balance would offer at this point, to be sure. I think we may see some changes in those, and I am going to a conference tomorrow where we'll be talking about pensions among the states and the issues that are there.
So do you get to present, or you're attending? Tell us more about this.
So I am one of the panelists to talk about how you handle the pension issues, and going through both defining the problem, defining the process to address the problem, and defining the policy solutions that are on the table to consider. And it is a mathematical as well as a political problem. The challenge is we often try to solve mathematical problems with political solutions, and necessarily the math equation has to work. So it's important not to ignore either, but at its foundation, whether you're working on your retirement goal or the pension retirement goal, you've got dollars in, what you earn along the way, and dollars out. It is a simple equation. The pension one happens to have a couple commas in the numbers, but it's no different than many of the decisions people make on an ongoing basis, and how do you make sure that it is there? It has a very long tail, and managing and building the right assumptions for that tail are key. Like our tax plan, if you say, well, we're going to grow at 15%, oh, well, it's easy to handle the problem then. But it is necessary that you build assumptions that can be met. Those who are aware may see that we have assumptions like an 8% return assumption in the pension, and would be critical of, is that right? I'm also critical of that one. I would like us to be in the 7-point-something range. I think people hearing that would say that's too high. The one thing that is different with the pension than what I might suggest if I were advising an individual, on the pension I'd like to be accurate. For my retirement, I'd like to be low. I only have one shot, and I am responsible. I have to beat it. With the pension, I am interested in spreading that cost evenly, not only across the population, but across time. So I don't necessarily want one decade to bear or fail to bear their share of the cost. So it is critical to try and look at what you have done. Our long-term return is actually 8.25% net. But I'm still a little nervous about the 8% number. So I would like to be a little lower, but actually not a lot lower, because I don't necessarily want this group to overpay. I just want to make sure we don't underpay.
Now, how were you chosen to be on the panel?
A number of things. There were a few folks that had worked with different states who nominated people to be considered. And at the Council of State Governments, some of our leaders in the past had been very involved. So other state leaders also said, you know, we think we might have something to offer to this discussion. Right.
Right. And where is this going to be held at?
This one is in Nashville.
And how about attendance? Ideas of how many people will be attending this type of thing?
I actually don't know. I have not been one that has been really involved in any of them, so I have not happened to attend any of the national meetings before that are there. So I will be learning a lot about everything, and then sharing a little bit on the pension topic.
Oh, very good. Well, changing subjects a little bit. In case you just joined us again, I'll let you know we are here in the Community Access TV with Legislative Access, and I'm Brenda Gutierrez, and with me we have Representative Stephen Johnson. We're going to talk a little bit more, kind of thinking back to something you touched on in the introduction, with being a farmer and water. California is having its issues with water. We know that a little bit further to the west, Kansas, Nebraska is having some concerns with water. How are things looking, and what would you say, what's our future for water in Kansas?
Whew, that is a big question. Our future for water in Kansas is whatever we collectively decide it will be.
And who's we, when you say we?
The people in Kansas, the stakeholders, the users of the water. So together we will decide. By continuing to do what we are doing, we are making a decision of how we are going to use water. When we make changes, that is where we go. There is a very engaged group of people looking at that. The Governor's Water Conference in November assembled something over 500 people from across the state looking at and discussing the issues, and that's been going on for a couple of years. Action is the hardest step, to agree on exactly what to do and what is completely right to do. Probably the biggest thing on water is that there is not one solution. There are many solutions important to each geographic area. So I don't know the entire state for water, but I've learned a lot more. I believe there's some areas just to the southwest of Great Bend where the water table is within 6 feet of the surface. Their ability to pump there is probably entirely different from something 100 miles west of there. And I think that our state has done a good job of having an idea of the water, what the recharge levels are, what the safe use levels are. And I think following that in each area really is key. As you get further west, where we are pulling down the water levels, there are a few questions that are there. It's maybe more of a concern to me than it is to other folks who are there and use and understand the water in their area. But I'm still trying to get my arms around how far does water move. This year we learned that there was more water than we calculated there would be from recharge, and they're trying to get their arms around where did that come from. Does water move farther than we thought it did underground? And I'm making that up because I don't know.
What if? Yeah,
right.
Maybe.
But
okay.
If we do that, then do we have even more issues interstate with Colorado, with Nebraska, with Oklahoma, of what that shared resource is? And do we have to do it not only individually and regionally in Kansas, but collectively as we look at the Ogallala? And thankfully there are experts on that to turn to try to figure out what to do. We have groups who have formed their own organizations, local groups, LEMAs and other acronyms that people may have heard, who have said, we are going to do this change. And the 25% reduction in use that has been voluntary in some areas. A year ago, I didn't think that was enough to stop the decline. Based on the calculations they had this year, a 22% decline would get us to stable. Well, that actually sounded pretty encouraging. And we have areas, I think particularly in the Northwest and one group in the Southwest that is working to do that. We have some other areas that have not worked, and they believe that, you know, the water is at 200 feet, the bottom of the hole is at 500 feet. There is a lot of water still available, and perhaps continuing to use that is the best solution that is there.
Personal experience, what you've done to help with conservation, say on your farm?
Well, I changed from our flood irrigation to using the pivots, and with the drop nozzles, that actually is quite efficient. The drip tape is more efficient. I think that they say you can get to 90% with the drop nozzles, and of course you don't lose anything with the tape.
Less evaporation, some of those things.
Right, a lot less
prevention.
water use than you'd have with the other solutions that are there. In our area, our water is managed out of the Stockton office, and we have a pretty good idea of what's available. And I operate 3 locations out of the Smoky Hill River, and I do have one well. In my well, it's 26 feet to water, and it's 58 feet to the bottom of the hole. And it's been 26 feet to water since I've known about the water there. But the reason that, and if there's not water in the river and not enough water for Salina, I'm done. And I know that, and that makes sense. So I'm able to operate when water is available, and it makes a huge difference. But when it is not, I have to be ready to not continue to irrigate.
Have you made some changes in what you're planting and what you're growing based on that?
Each year
like
you look
you're
at.
living at.
Right.
This is an example of one of
So-
our neighbors making that change.
So each year you look at it, and so a huge gift to us is Canopolis Lake. The flood control is a tremendous benefit for farming along the river. There are a few things that are not always benefits, but that is a benefit. Having a regular flow below the dam for the last 2 years, a large rain in the Ellsworth area has given us plenty of water, which has been wonderful, and I could maximize irrigation. 3 years ago, we had the dry summer, and it didn't work. And what was wonderful is the city of Salina worked with the irrigators between Salina and the Canopolis Dam and found a way to say, okay, we need X amount of water. But if you guys cooperate and say, okay, you can turn on now and we'll try and figure out about what that flow is in the river, and you can run for this many hours, pumping this many gallons per minute, and everybody can have this much water. And everyone really worked together, and a few local leaders really led that effort and worked so hard to help coordinate us. And Salina, of course, was key in working through that. But that was one of the things that the governor then pointed to say, if you'll work together to manage the water that you do have available, here's one way that it did work. And that I was only a participant, but anyway, if I name people, I'll come way short.
Somebody,
but
yeah.
yes, but from the dam all the way to Salina, there were a lot of great leaders that made it work.
See, that makes a difference. That helps us know you talk to these people who talk to these people who, if we name them, they're our neighbors, or maybe we go
They
to
are.
church with them, or we
We
volunteer
certainly
with
do.
them. So if I had a question, I wanted to know something, or anyone that's watching our show, how could they reach you? How could they come see? You had 3 wells. What does that mean? Can you show me? Or what are you doing with pensions? How can somebody reach you or talk to you about these kind of things?
So a number of ways, and for all of us, a great way to just reach us generically is on our house email account. And so for me, it's stephen.johnson@house.ks.gov. So house.ks.gov is the same for all of us, first name, last name. So if you just remember that as a way to reach your legislator, if it's Senate, it would be for our Senator Tom Dardarpke at senate.ks.gov. And that is a great way just to remember to reach us. For me, a great way, absolutely. If somebody wants to come out, they are more than welcome to.
tour.
I will bore you ad nauseum looking at the irrigation stuff. But reaching phone is a great way also. And my cell phone is the one that I put on my card. Folks are welcome to use that one. If we want to put that up for folks to use, that is certainly fine. A great way to catch me is during drive time, particularly on equipment, is a great way to just chat if you can put up with the noise.
So you're out on the tractor and
Right.
you take a call.
Yeah, the Bluetooth works
you're working
great.
And
Right.
hands-free with Bluetooth.
Right.
Yeah.
So particularly, the GPS makes it still look like you can drive straight.
The lines are
So yeah, I may get interrupted on the corners, but other than that, it works fine.
And how about in Topeka? Your staff, your office, can we come see you? Do you
Oh,
take
that's
visitors?
great.
What-
I love
what about
having
that?
visitors in Topeka. So yes, my office is 286 North. Staff is pretty thin. I do have a great assistant or secretary who works with the committee, and I've been lucky to have great interns for the last couple of years. So they are wonderful, but please come to Topeka. I really appreciate when I get folks from home that are there. And if I'm lucky enough to have a minute or two to drag you around the Capitol, one of the other great things is the thinking that went into our state capitol. It is beautiful.
Renovations, it's beautiful.
And if you have a chance to just enjoy that, that is our building. I would say one of the things I like about the job, and I'm glad I get to be there. I don't always use like to describe the legislature, but walking into the Capitol is a great benefit to get to have. And so I enjoy that heritage. And I think, you know, just as who had the vision to come up with the lake to give us recreation, water for irrigation for municipal use in many cases, flood control, and how much sacrifice did it take to do that, and what do we need to do next? How did the folks who built the Capitol have a vision of what could work to serve us not only in 1870, but so well now and beyond? That vision is exciting to get to share.
Yeah. Well, you said what's something that you would say is going really well? When you think back over this last year, what's something that's going really well in Topeka?
That is a good question. You will get a different answer, obviously, by each group that you ask. And unfortunately, something that's not going well is the ideological silos, I'll say, of here's my way and things must be my way. But when those break down, that is when I feel things go well. So generally on the pension work, we were able to, until this last year, every vote that we had on the floor and in committee, if it was split in both parties. It was not split by party. And I think that was really important as we worked through reform. In the Ag Committee, things rarely are partisan. It is dealing with what do we want to do, what vision is there for change, what things do we need to do to make industry work better. So where those things happen is where I'd like to see us continue to champion those groups, those leaders, and what we want to have happen. I think that some of the things that were led, the two things that I mentioned, did cross a lot of boundaries and people that are criticized. I think the governor was right to ask about water, to ask about pensions, and both of those were priorities from his first day. And you don't get anywhere without the leadership on all three branches of the government there.
So looking back, if I had an issue or I had a concern, how could I get that to you? How could you lift that up? And do you have an example of a citizen from Saline County or McPherson-Lyndsburg that got the information to you, that you lifted up, and then action was taken?
Yeah, there'll be, I'll say, a half a dozen of those that make it from start to at least some sort of completion each year, and probably about 20 that come up each year. And I try to carry each of them. I'm not sure if I'll be able to do as good a job of that this year with the work that starts on the tax committee from the start. But the first one that I had was a group in Ellsworth that was working with the Good Samaritan Society to try and figure out how to make the best use of their property. And there was just an issue with how things were zoned and deeded there that needed to be corrected at the state level. We went through, drafted the legislation. They were a tremendous help telling us what we needed. All we had to do was work it all the way through. It was great to be my first bill to carry. Everyone understood that it needed to be done. It passed the committees in both chambers unanimously. When people identify something that needs to happen, those are fun things to get to work on. There are others that are not as clear. There's an individual who has worked very hard to say, how do we get other parties on the ballot? So we've worked to draft the bill. We've introduced the bill. It's in the committee. Now it's to get the chair to hear that bill. I'm not sure I'm going to get past that point.
So it's going to take a while.
I'm not sure.
Some barriers?
Yeah, I'm not sure that we can. A committee chair can decide not to hear something. They set that committee agenda, and then you have to figure out, is there a way I can work around them? And if an issue falls squarely in a committee, it's pretty hard. So.
Yeah. So some positives, so don't give up hope if people want to call
and one of the
come visit with you about the topic.
And that has been what I have done the last 2 years. I have really used my interns to help me and say, okay, I need you to stay on top of these issues and follow them through. And this is a great chance for us together to learn how this process is going to work. How you start with the research department to make sure that it's consistent, go to the reviser, write the bill, and start working it through the process.
You mentioned interns a couple of times.
Yes.
Do you have how many, or how does someone find out about if they're interested in doing the internship?
Just contact contact me again. So the internship deadline for this year just passed, but if somebody's terribly interested, we'll figure out
Sweet.
how to get them involved. Typically someone who's in college. I've had sophomores through seniors. They've all been fabulous, and they spend varying amounts of time. Some people may want to do a program that just fits their schedule. If they do the program that fits the intern schedule, then they get college credit for it. So anyway, it is a great way to learn the process for someone who is interested.
You brought up education. We served together on some strategic planning for Southeast Saline. Anything you'd like to speak about that has to do with education, public education?
Oh, there's so much, and our school boards have such a tough job figuring out, I mean, what a mission and vision to figure out education in each of our areas. So a huge thank you to people who are doing that. On the education topic, concerned about funding. Will the block grant be sufficient? What will the next formula look like? I am very willing to look at another formula. I think there can be a better formula. Very concerned about who all is at the table to write the formula.
Yeah, this rewriting the formula. What does that mean? I've heard that kind of thrown around.
Yeah, so the last formula was written in the 90s. If I were a manager, I would learn how to manage to that funding formula. And there may be some things that we don't necessarily like about how that grows and changes over time. And perhaps there's a different vision about what we want education to do, be, or to be able to do with it. And if that is there, it may be a good thing to have a new way of saying, how do we make sure that the needed resources are provided to get the results that we want for our children? And I think that's a useful discussion, but it's only a productive discussion if I have all the inputs in that. And necessarily I have to have people with whom I don't agree, but who are expert in different areas to be able to have a robust discussion on that. So I'm confident there will be a discussion, and I will certainly work to do anything I can to make sure it is a robust discussion.
Very good.
So.
Well, I have one more question from me, and if there's anything else that you wanted to add that we hadn't talked about today, any other of the topics or chairs, or you know, if you waved your magic wand, what would happen? Anything else you'd like to share on that?
Well, if I think about, I didn't spend a lot of time in the budget balancing on cutting expenses.
Okay, sure.
But the best ideas there tend to come from people who are out there dealing with things every day. And if we are all truly on the same page of what we want to achieve, I think there are other small things that we can do. I don't know that there are huge things. I would love to think that the $2.6 million being spent on the study actually comes up with productive results. And I think it's possible. So there might be some things we can find there. I think we can look at, so for corrections, not a big part of the budget, but whom do we really want to put in prison? And who might we be able to afford to not have in prison? And certainly, as we look at each crime, we think of the big negative impacts, and I don't mean to minimize any of those, but I've actually gotten emails from constituents who have said, you know, why do we necessarily hold this person at expense for this long when there might be a more productive solution? So I think continuing to look at a lot of the things that we do and just ask ourselves questions of what results do we want and what can we afford over time. I think there is, it's not going to be by June,
Yeah.
but it is a medium and long-term discussion that is always healthy to have.
Well, we might have to do this again because there's some layers to strengthening the family that I'd like to visit with you about, housing, apartments, all kinds of things like that for Salina. The last quick question, who do you trust?
Who do I trust? Well, I'm lucky to have a lot of neighbors that I trust, but that is so important. And in the legislature, as we work through, I tend to trust a lot of people, sometimes to a detriment. But the group that voted for the change in income tax is generally a group that I trust. There are about 27 people that were there. There are many people outside of that. I had a wonderful ranking minority on my pension committee when I started as a chair, and working together with her was a key to be able to make it successful. And similarly, there are folks in both parties in the Senate that have been really helpful to sit down and say, wait a minute, what can you live with?
Yeah.
What does this need to do? and you do find those people. So
Sounds like you could start listing them out and
I
fill out a page. I'm glad to hear that.
I could put a few on the net.
Yeah, very
yes.
good. Well, thank you for joining us. We're so glad you could come in and be on our Community Access television show, Legislative Access. And thank you, everyone, for watching us. We hope you enjoyed our show, and maybe we will get together again, get some ideas. We like to hear feedback. People call Access Studios. Let us know what you thought about the show. What questions would you like to know? We put a call out to ask, what would people be interested in knowing? How do you get to know your legislators, other than you read about what's in the paper, you see what's online, how we can get to know you. So we appreciate you coming in, and thank you for spending some time with us today.